Hello, welcome to the second episode of A.C. Ahmed's English Literature series. The questions we are discussing in this series are very useful for exams like UGC NET, SLETs, or any other exam in English literature. Don't concentrate on the questions and answers only. Listen to the commentary attentively because a lot many things are covered in the form of the commentary that follows the questions and answers. Here is our first question. Who is considered to be the leader of the Metaphysical School of Poetry? Based on the themes, based on the style of writing, based on the fact that they were contemporaries, quite a few writers have labeled as being belonging to one particular school or another of poetry. Likewise, we have something called the Metaphysical School of Poetry, and the question seeks to know who is considered to be the leader of that particular school of poetry, and the answer is John Donne. John Donne was a very famous poet, and he is considered to be the leader of the Metaphysical School of Poetry. The Metaphysical School of Poetry comprised such other people like Wagon, Cleveland, Croshaw, Marvell, and others. They had a distinct style of writing poetry. These people were men of learning and they endeavored to show their learning in the poetry they wrote. Our next question. Who said Donne affects the metaphysics? Donne affects the metaphysics is a very popular statement given by a notable critic. And the question wants us to answer the name of the critic who gave this particular statement. Donne affects the metaphysics. And the answer to this particular question is John Dryden. It was John Dryden who gave a statement that Donne affects the metaphysics. John Dryden was a famous poet, and apart from writing poetry, he did a lot of critical work also, and this particular statement is attributed to him. Next question. Who fixed the name Metaphysical Poets to Donne and his followers? In English literature, we come across quite a number of groupings, and each group has its own style, its own way of writing poetry, drama, or fiction, and they become popular under one name or the other. The best example that I can give is university wits, metaphysical poets. Okay, these were groups, and this particular group was called metaphysical poets by one famous critic, and we have to identify him. And here is the answer. The critic who gave Donne and his followers the name of metaphysical poets was none other than Dr. Samuel Johnson. Let me tell you, metaphysical. This particular word, metaphysical, was a negative term. Dr. Samuel Johnson made use of the term metaphysical in relation to John Donne and his followers in a negative way. He wanted to insult them, and in order to insult Donne and his followers, Dr. Samuel Johnson made use of the term Metaphysical School of Poetry. Our next question. In which book did Dr. Samuel Johnson give Donne and his followers the name of metaphysical poets? Friends, Dr. Samuel Johnson was a poet in his own right. He was a playwright. In fact, this man, Dr. Samuel Johnson, who is known as the literary dictator, happens to be the first lexicographer in English, and he wrote a drama called Rosellos, or the Prince of Abyssinia, to meet the expenses of his mother's funeral. He has written a wonderful poem called London, and he is best known for his preface to Shakespeare. So the question is, in which book of his did Dr. Samuel Johnson call Donne and his followers as the Metaphysical School of Poetry? Apart from all the things that I just now mentioned, he has written lives of poets also. In one such, he calls them metaphysical poets. And the answer is Life of Cowley. Dr. Samuel Johnson has written as many as 52 biographies. Life of Milton, life of Donne, life of so many other poets and dramatists have been written by Samuel Johnson. And it is the life of Cowley, that is, life of Abraham Cowley, that Dr. Samuel Johnson disparagingly calls Donne and all his followers, Henry Vaughan, Croshaw, Cowley, and all others, as belonging to the Metaphysical School of Poetry. Our next question. What is the name of the professor who brought the metaphysical poets back into limelight in the 20th century? These people, John Donne and others like Cleveland, Marvell, Croshaw, Vaughan and all, they wrote poetry in the early 17th century. And in the next 2 or 3 centuries, they were almost forgotten. Nobody cared to read them. But one particular professor took interest and brought these people, brought these poets and their poetry back into limelight. And the name of the professor happens to be Professor Grierson. It is Professor Grierson who gave Donne and all his followers a new lease of life in the 20th century. Except for the services of Professor Grierson, the metaphysical poets had become history. They had already been forgotten. It was he who gave them a new lease of life. Our next question. Who wrote the celebrated essay, The Metaphysical Poets? Like I just now told you, it was Professor H.F.C. Grierson, who helped the metaphysical poets come back to limelight in the 20th century. Not only he, there was another great person who helped the metaphysical poets regain currency in the 20th century by writing a popular essay called The Metaphysical Poets. He was none other than T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was a poet, playwright, critic, and a thinker as well. To his credit, T.S. Eliot introduced the poetic drama in the 20th century. Poetic drama had its heyday during the 16th and 17th centuries. In the 20th century, there was nothing called poetic drama, but T.S. Eliot wrote dramas like Murder in the Cathedral, Reunion, and all others using this particular form. Next, what is meant by metaphysical conceit? Metaphysical conceit is the crux or the central point of all the poetry that has been written by the metaphysical poets John Donne, Herbert, Wagon, Cleveland, Morwell, Abraham Cowley, and others. So they made use of a figure of speech which is known as metaphysical conceit. Every poem written by these people, they made use of this literary figure. We have to give the explanation or meaning of that particular figure of speech. And here it is. By metaphysical conceit, we mean a comparison that is drawn between two things which are quite dissimilar to each other. You might be knowing that when we compare two things which have something in common, making use of words like or as, we call it a simile. A simile becomes a metaphysical conceit if there is nothing that is overtly common between these two things. If there is something that is common between the two things that are compared to each other, we can call it a simile. But here the metaphysical poets drew comparisons between things which had little in common. So the reader would be shocked and he has to wait until the poet explains the similarities between those things. Here is our next question. Who wrote the Holy Sonnets? In another video of mine, I have explained everything about the sonnet. Sonnet is a 14-lined poem which can be divided into an octave consisting 8 lines and a sestet consisting 6 lines. And ever since the form was introduced by Petrarch, it had only one particular topic, a male lover's problems. But some people wrote sonnets on other topics. Here is one, holy sonnets. Sonnets written on holy topics, divine topics. The poet who wrote a sonnet on divine topics was John Donne. When the sonnet was introduced in English by Sir Thomas Watt and Earl of Surrey, they wrote sonnets only on the male lover's problems. And later on also, different poets who wrote sonnets followed the same theme. They did not experiment with the form to other topics. But John Donne deviated from the established path. He wrote sonnets on divine matters and he gave them the name called Holy Sonnets. So, Holy Sonnets were written by John Donne, who happened to be the leader of the Metaphysical School of Poetry. Next question. Which metaphysical poet saved Milton from being punished by Charles II? To understand this question, we have to have a bit of knowledge pertaining to English history. In 1649, Charles I, who was the King of England at that point of time, was beheaded, was killed by the Puritans. And after the killing of Charles I, Oliver Cromwell or Lord Protector became the ruler of England. During this time, Milton was given the position of Latin Secretary. Oliver Cromwell died in 1658 and his Puritan government fell apart. Following this, Charles II, the son of Charles I, became the monarch of England. And now Charles II wanted to punish Milton for having supported Oliver Cromwell and his regime. Milton had written quite a number of pamphlets against the monarchy, both Charles I and Charles II. So he was in trouble. One metaphysical poet saved his life, and he was Andrew Marvell. Andrew Marvell, who was a metaphysical poet, convinced Charles II, the King of England, to not to punish John Milton for having supported the earlier regime, that is, of the Puritans. So here, in this particular video, I have given you some information relating to the Metaphysical School of Poetry, the leader, the followers, and the different things that they were involved in. These videos help you like hyperlinks. They give you a sense of direction as to what kind of bits are likely asked in exams. Thank you.